Welcome to What You Missed. I am your host, Eric Darnley Small. And on today's show, we are going to be doing a very interesting deep dive that I think is really important. One of the things to know about this show and about what I try to do on this channel is sort of expose my thinking and kind of try and get a dialogue with viewers about where you're at on a number of different issues. One of the things we're going to focus on today is what I have been talking about for a long time. And what I try to do on this channel is show my homework. I want you guys to know where I think, what I think about these things, and where I'm getting my information from, what my thinking is on it, where it comes from, and hopefully shed some light, maybe educate you, maybe you can educate me, and so forth. And today, I am going back to what I've been talking about a long time. The media, the mainstream media, and the narrative that's out there right now is that we are in a fight for democracy. And while that might be true, what is happening is we're in the midst of a civil war in the GOP, the Republican Party. And because we're in the midst of a civil war, my feeling strongly is because the narrative is going to be if Donald Trump wins, is that African Americans voted for him, Hispanics came out and voted for him at higher numbers, etc. So the blame is going to be put on Democrats. It's going to be put on young voters who didn't come out because they don't like, for instance, the fact that he didn't do anything on student debt relief. They're going to vote on Muslims who decided to stay home because they didn't like the policy on Gaza, right? And of course, that narrative is going to be false. The truth of the matter is that the country is going to fall into autocracy under Donald Trump because white males did it. Because the Republican Party, which is overrepresentative amongst white males, decided that it was time to turn this country into an autocratic country because democracy was no longer working for them. That is the reason. The Republican Party, which has paid footsie with the conservative movement, with the white nationalist movement, has overreached, and it has now seen its party destroyed by these people, and it is their fault. This is the reason. If the country falls into autocracy under Donald Trump, it is the fault of the Republican Party and specifically the conservative movement. And I want to get into that, but of course I want to first remind you guys that this show streams live Mondays, 10:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. I try to do it every Monday. I think I'm getting closer and closer to that goal, and I think that we will have clips to show you during the show, but during the week. But if you want to see this live and communicate with me on the chat or whatever, that's the way to do it. In addition, I am going to read articles today. That is my homework, that I'm showing you why I believe the things that I believe, like that I believe that we're in a civil war. You can find full articles in our Mastodon at mastodon.vtip.me / at what you missed. Let me show that again. Mastodon.vtip.me / at what you missed. You'll see the full articles. You can reply back to it. Mastodon, for those people who don't know, is a Twitter clone. It looks exactly like Twitter. I've not seen any real difference in terms of the look and style. So if you guys like Twitter, which I'm sure everyone does, you will love Mastodon. So with all that said, let me get into it. And I'm going to begin today's show with an article, a double dose of The Moment of Krug, because I really am liking the way that this all works out. And again, I sort of, if you have seen this before, I'm going to be repeating myself a lot. But I think it's important. It's important to re-emphasize what is going on today, and that this is nothing new. This is only the natural conclusion for a country that, after the civil rights movement, in my view, the generation that came after the civil rights movement, my generation known as Gen Xers, they today have decided that the success of the civil rights movement is too much for them. White males did. And they have decided that democracy is not worth saving, and it's time to undo it. But This didn't just begin with Donald Trump. Again, the major narrative, particularly from Never Trumpers, is that this party was doing fine prior to this, that it's not until Donald Trump came along that all of a sudden things went south. That is a lie. That is not the case. This party was in trouble long ago. I would say personally, it goes back to Ronald Reagan. There's actually, I think, a YouTube video that says how Ronald Reagan ruined everything. But that is my view. I believe that it is Ronald Reagan who created this. But certainly Newt Gingrich during Bill Clinton's time as president was the beginning of the end if it wasn't under Reagan. So let me go into this. And I just want to remind people, just in case you don't know, Paul Krugman, he is an economist. He is a Nobel Pulitzer Prize-winning economist. He is on the left of the spectrum. And let me, one of the things is about this channel and about me is I tend to sort of pontificate for a while. I sort of go off topic, but anyone who is coming to this video new, coming to this channel new, I don't know how much you guys know about these people, so I'm sort of try to condense everything, and I end up running out of time. I'm already 12 minutes in, haven't even gotten into it, but I just want to say, just for those people who don't know, Paul Krugman is more leans to the liberal side. He's a Democratic, someone who consults with Democrats, usually liberal progressives. I've said before on this channel that Ronald Reagan created the modern conservative movement that is under assault. Ronald Reagan famously did it by building a coalition. That coalition was most famously referred to as a three-legged stool. That three-legged stool was, as if you can imagine, a stool with three legs. One leg was the Hawks, who are now have been ostracized and thrown out of the party. They're the Lincoln Project people. John McCain's of the world, Liz Cheney's of the world, they're the Hawks. The next was the evangelicals, which are now the Christian nationalists, which have consumed the party. They are the Donald Trump base. And there is the economic or business, pro-business end of it. That was Milton Friedman. That is a party that was about tax cuts, spur growth. You'll find there's something called the Laffer curve. For you guys who don't know, you can go to Wikipedia and look at these things. Art Laffer, this is a guy who famously decided or put out there that when you cut taxes, it spurs growth. That has been debunked. It has been debunked for decades, and it still comes back. Paul Krugman calls that a zombie idea because you keep killing it and it keeps coming back. But he's of that ilk. So Milton Friedman, Laffer. Today you would have Steve Forbes would be a part of that. You would have Stephen Moore, I think is still out there, as a part of that group. And of course, anyone in business, corporate America. So the Koch brothers, Elon Musk today, Bill Ackman today, all of these right wingers that have been around for years. Those guys lean in that direction. On the left, you have folks like Paul Krugman. You have, I think Stiglitz, I can't think of his first name right now. You have Robert Reich, who has a YouTube page, by the way. You should check him out. He was Treasury Secretary in the Clinton administration. You have, I think, Treasury or, no, he wasn't Treasury Secretary. I'm sorry. I'll think of it in a minute. But anyway, you have these guys who are what you would call Keynesians, Keynesian economics, right? So these are the guys who believe that government has a huge role in spurring growth and keeping the economy growing, and they believe in regulation. So politically, they would be aligned with Elizabeth Warren types. They would be aligned with Katie Porter, those types, right? Paul Krugman sort of hews from that side of it. And, he believes that government has a role to play. The biggest area of difference that these folks come from, and again, read about this yourselves. I think if you want to look into this, look at the 08, 09 Great Recession, right? Look at how that unfolded. Look at how it turned out and how it came back. Look at, what just happened recently after COVID, right? Keynesian economics believes when you have a crisis that the government has to pour money into the system to lift all boats. The Milton Friedmans of the world believed, much like Herbert Hoover, that you have to cut taxes and cut spending. You have to rein in deficits at that point in time. When you begin to make changes like tax cuts, when you begin to cut up, take apart policy that's been around for many years that has kept the economy strong, it has dire consequences and it has huge problems. It's also extremely important, and I'm going to beat this drum all year. You're going to hear me talk about this over and over again, because I predict, particularly if Donald Trump becomes president again, we're going to have a major crash happen. And I'm not big on this, because that's the argument and that's the conversation right now in the on the right and on the internet, is that the market is going to crash, join Bitcoin, join all these other scammy things. But I truly believe, and I think that the election year and Donald Trump's antics and his different court cases have dominated a lot of the coverage, particularly if you're on CNN, MSNBC, and these others, even on Fox News. But it's easy to miss what's really going on. And one of the things that's huge is that you had very close to a run on the banks last year. We almost had a bank failure last year. I talked about this in a video. You can take a look at stream.vtip.me. I have a video about how China's largest real estate developer went belly up. And I mean, we're talking about billions and billions of dollars. There's one in Europe that also went south. These things are huge. They're very significant. And right now, you've got two huge problems that are still unresolved in America. You have the real estate industry is struggling. Retail, or I should say commercial real estate is struggling. And if you look at the video that I have both on YouTube and on stream.vtip.me, you'll see that Janet Yellen was in front of the committee. No one wants to talk about it. No one talks about it because the House is such a mess. But Janet Yellen was asked questions about what is going on with commercial real estate. There could be a huge crash coming. And in addition, you have, if that goes under, the banking, once again, is going to suffer, because banking and real estate are connected. How do most real estate developers get their money? Through banks. If the real estate developers go under, the banks take the loss and they start to suffer, and you start seeing run on banks and etc. And my biggest concern is a Donald Trump who doesn't give a crap about anything is going to start taking apart, because we know Donald Trump and his biggest acolyte, I can't think of his name right now, but we know Stephen Miller, but I'll think of it in a minute. They're about taking a part of the administrative state. Neil Gorsuch is another one that wants to do that. They've already gone after the CFPB, right? So they want to create a situation where they want to neuter the administrative state. And by doing that, by reining in the administrative state, when a shock like that happens, they're going to be paralyzed. They're not going to be able to address these issues. So it is very important to be aware of these things. And I'm going to keep a close eye on that. And if you guys want to also keep a close eye, you want to send me some information, again, the Mastodon is where you need to go, which I had up earlier, mastodon.vtip.me/@whatyouMissed. Put links to any videos, messages, and all on there. So let me get to today's show, because got a lot to talk about and I am already way behind. But so here, Krugman talks about one of the things that is concerning him, and there's going to be back-to-back moments of Krug today. Two stories I want him to talk about. And one, he goes into stuck ships and supply chain inflation. And he says in this article that, and again, you can find the full article. This will not, anyone who's been to this channel knows that I do not do the full article here. These are clips. You can read the full article in the Mastodon, but there will be a link to it. But it says, it has been a week since the Dali, a container ship, struck the Francis Scott Key Bridge in Baltimore. It's still stuck there, And the images remain amazing, in part because the vessel is so huge compared to what's left of the bridge. How could planners not have realized that operating superships in the harbor's confined waters posed a risk? And with the ship and pieces of the bridge blocking the harbor entry, the port of Baltimore remains closed. How big a deal is that for the economy? Well, it would have been quite a big deal if it had happened in late 2021 or early 2022, when global supply chains were under a lot of pressure. Remember, when all of those ships were streaming back and forth in front of Los Angeles waiting for a berth. It's less important now. Pre Dali, Baltimore was only the 17th busy U.S. port, and there's apparently enough spare capacity that most of the cargoes that would normally have passed through Baltimore can be diverted to other East Coast ports. The Dali is no Ever Given, the ship that blocked the Suez Canal when it ran aground in 2021. Elsewhere, the Houthis have been firing missiles at ships entering or leaving the Red Sea, that is, heading to or from the Suez Canal. Presumably, as a result of these and other problems, the New York Fed widely cited index of global supply chain pressure, while still not flashing red lights, it was showing in the winter of 2021-2022, has worsened significantly since last August. And given what we know about the cause of the inflation surge of 2021-2022, this worsening makes me a bit nervous. If you think supply chain disruptions were the main driver of inflation and the easing of these disruptions the main driver of disinflation, you have to be worried about the effects of a renewed worsening of the supply chain situation. Now, supply chain problems today aren't remotely as bad as they were in 2021-2022. If the Dali disaster had occurred back then, it really would have been a collapsed bridge too far. At least according to the New York Fed measure, we've actually been experiencing a stretch of below normal supply pressure, and all of that has happened as a return to normal. This might not have been much adverse effect on inflation, but I'm not as sure about this as I'd like to be. Supply chains are making me nervous again. So this is a warning that we could be in a situation where the supply chains get worse and we end up in an inflation type situation. And that's going to be bad for Joe Biden, of course. And because it's bad for Joe Biden, it's going to be bad for America and the election. But let's hope that that's not the case. But let's just be clear that one of the things that Paul Krugman is talking about is that, number one, the economy is doing great. We're pulling out of inflation and things are looking beautiful. Number two, crap happens. And when crap like this happens, in addition to all these other things, like because of what's happening in Gaza, Houthis have decided that they're going to start attacking ships in the Red Sea. That's not good. And what might happen, and I think is very possible in his mind, is that these things are going to build on top of one another to give us a supply chain shock that is going to have an adverse effect and is going to cause inflation to rise once again. So that's something to take a look at. But what's important to note here is that what Krugman is saying is that this is something that is unfolding now. It isn't something due to policy by Biden. You'll hear a lot on the right and even some on the left talk about we spent too much money, right? We gave people too much money, or it's the $20 an hour that California restaurant goers are getting. That's the cause of inflation. No, it is what's happening right now in the Suez Canal, what's happening in Baltimore, and what could happen down the line. Who knows what other shock is going to happen. I just mentioned earlier at the top of the show about the retail industry, commercial industry. So those are the reasons why if inflation comes back, it comes back. It is not that we spend too much money, as you've been hearing from a lot on the right, that we spent too much money during COVID. By the way, we spent that money under Donald Trump, right? Not under Joe Biden. Joe Biden continued it and then stopped it, but we spent it under Donald Trump. No one wants to talk about that. But it's important to remember what is really going on. Um, will MAGA Republicans block Baltimore's rebuilding? So here is the second article here, and I think it's fascinating because it this delves a little bit more into what I really want to talk about today. And this is from New York Times, of course, April 2nd, 2024. So it starts. Soon after the huge container ship struck Baltimore's Francis Scott Key, bringing it down, President Biden pledged that the federal government would, quote, pay the entire cost of the reconstruction of reconstructing the bridge. This would clearly be the right thing to do, not just to help the state of Maryland, but also to limit the economic damage from a disaster that has blocked both a major road artery and a major port. Among other things, the Port of Baltimore plays a key role in both exports of coal and trade in farm and construction equipment. So the bridge disaster will have direct adverse effects on the heartland as well as the East Coast. And if America were still the same country that enacted the Federal Aid Highway Act of 1956, passed with overwhelming bipartisan support in Congress and signed into law by the Republican president, which gave rise to our interstate system, there would be little question that Congress would approve funding soon after it returns from Easter recess. But we aren't that country anymore. Biden will probably be able to get the funds for rebuilding, but it's by no means a sure thing. The rise of MAGA Republicans is only part of the problem. I've seen several people citing the response to the 2007 collapse of the Interstate 35 West Bridge in Minnesota as an example of what things were like in a better political era. Indeed, within days, Congress voted unanimously to provide $250 million in aid. But that was a one-off. The Minnesota bridge collapse highlighted the decaying state of America's infrastructure, and one might have expected the disaster to lead to real action, but it didn't. President Barack Obama pleaded with Congress to approve broad increase in infrastructure spending and was able to sign a highway funding bill in 2015, but for the most part he was stymied by GOP opposition. As President Donald Trump repeatedly promised to revamp America's infrastructure, its infrastructure week became a running joke, but never delivered. Major action on infrastructure didn't happen until late 2021 with the enactment of the bipartisan infrastructure law, which, despite the name, received only 13 Republican votes in the House. And that was with Democrats in full control of Congress. It's not foolish to worry that MAGA hardliners will block aid to Maryland in much the same way that they block aid to Ukraine. But again, MAGA is only part of the problem. Let's look for a minute about why it took 14 years after the Minnesota bridge collapse for us to finally take major action on infrastructure. Extreme partisanship, which took hold long before Trump took control of the GOP, is part of the answer. It was clear through most of the Obama years that Republicans wanted to prevent good things from happening on a Democratic president's watch. There was also an element of reflexive opposition to government spending in general, no matter how obvious the need. Finally, to the extent that Trump had anything like an infrastructure plan, it was very well Trumpian. Even before he took office, I predicted that he wouldn't actually do much to build infrastructure because he and his associates clearly weren't interested in producing a clean plan for government investment. The history here is reason enough to worry about rebuilding in Baltimore, even if the bridge collapse hadn't been caught up in the culture war politics. But of course it has. MAGA Republicans and media figures wasted no time after the bridge collapse trying to cast blame on the usual suspects, including funds meant to be spent on green energy and, in particular, diversity initiatives in the immediate wake of the Key Bridge collapse. A Republican state legislator from Utah replied in a post on X, which is Twitter, disparaging a member of the Maryland Port Commission, writing, quote, "This is what happens when you have governors who prioritize diversity over the well-being and security of citizens." A Republican former state legislator from Florida posted a video clip of the Key Bridge collapse with the caption, "DEI did this." Baltimore's mayor, Brandon Scott, has been a special target on X, the site formerly known as Twitter, for no apparent reason other than the fact that he's black. So, will partisanship and conspiracy theory get in the way of rebuilding the Key Bridge? I'd like to dismiss that risk, but not that long ago, if you asked me, I wouldn't have expected Republicans to stonewall aid to Ukraine either. So this is no time to be complacent. So Paul Krugman gets exactly where I want to be next, because what we're seeing and what he's seeing is the fact that the Republican Party, and I have continued to say this over and over again, they hate Democrats more than they love the country. And this did not begin with Donald Trump. People like to say it did, but it does not. This was a function of a already toxic Republican Party. The Republican Party was already moving towards authoritarianism. Conservatism at its core, conservatism has many different parts, ideological part, a policy part, etc. At its core, it has white nationalism, and at the core of white nationalism is fascism. And when you have drunk the Kool-Aid like they have, because Donald Trump said if we get everyone out to vote, Republicans will lose. So he is admitting that the American people don't want what these people are selling. But because they cannot do anything, and because they hate America, they hate Democrats so much, and they also hate America so much, what they're trying to do is create pain for the American people, pain for the Democrats, which is when they're in power, you're creating pain for the American people. And by creating pain for the American people, they hope that they'll find disfavor with Democrats and get into power. This is extremely cynical, but the Republican Party has been at this way before Donald Trump. Donald Trump saw this and said, I can do that too, and I can do it even better. And that is what he's doing. But make no mistake, this began with the conservative movement going way back before Donald Trump. Fantastic viewers, Eric Darnley Small here, and I hope you're loving today's episode of What You Missed. You've reached the end of today's show, but don't worry, there's more show coming up. If you're watching this on YouTube, please click the bell so that you'll be notified when more content is available. You can also help the channel by clicking the like and subscribe buttons. It helps the YouTube algorithm find new viewers so that I can keep bringing you all this incredible content you enjoy. But wait, there are more ways to support the show. You can make a contribution through the show's PayPal, which goes a long way in helping produce even better content for you. And consider becoming a part of our growing community by joining our Mastodon site at mastodon.vtip.me/@whatyoumissed for more engaging discussions and exclusive updates. And here's something you won't want to miss. Mark your calendars for our live show streaming on YouTube and stream.vtip.me Monday mornings, 10:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Your support means the world to me, and together we're making What You Missed the best it can be. Thanks for being a part of my journey.